Welcome, and thank you for being here. Today's story begins with a simple but powerful idea, one that quietly challenges how we think about the past. It asks us to pause, take a breath, and look at history not as a fixed record carved in stone, but as something far more human, careful, and evolving. When we talk about the timeline of civilization, we often imagine it as a straight line. Dates feel precise, eras feel settled. It gives us comfort to believe that the past is fully mapped, labeled, and complete. But in reality, the timeline we learn is not a perfect memory of human history. It is a reconstruction carefully assembled from fragments that survived time. Archaeologists, historians, and scientists do not see the past directly. They interpret it through objects left behind, layers of earth, chemical traces, and rare written records. Each discovery is like a sentence from a book where most pages are missing. From those sentences, entire chapters are carefully inferred. This means the timeline is not false, but it is not final. It changes when new evidence appears, when methods improve, or when old assumptions are questioned. What once seemed certain has often been revised, sometimes quietly, sometimes dramatically. Dates move. Interpretations shift. Entire periods gain new meaning. Understanding this does not weaken history. It strengthens it. A timeline that can change is a timeline that is alive, open to learning, correction, and deeper understanding. It reminds us that history is not about certainty, but about careful reasoning based on what we currently know. As we begin today's story, keep this in mind: the past is not a finished picture. It is a work in progress. And within that uncertainty lies one of the most fascinating questions we can ask: how much more is there still waiting to be understood? The timeline of civilization is constructed from evidence, not preserved as a complete memory. Everything we believe about ancient societies comes from interpreting physical remains, natural records, and a limited number of written sources. These pieces do not arrive neatly organized. They are fragmented, scattered, and often separated by vast gaps of time. Archaeology provides objects and structures, but objects alone do not explain how people thought, governed, or lived day to day. A stone tool can show skill, but not language. A ruined city can show planning, but not beliefs. Scientists must connect these fragments using comparison, probability, and context. This process is careful, but it is never absolute. Dating methods add another layer of interpretation. Techniques such as radiocarbon dating, tree ring analysis, and geological layering offer time ranges, not exact moments. Each method has limits, margins of error, and conditions where it works best. When new methods improve precision, older conclusions are often adjusted rather than discarded. Written records, when they exist, introduce a different challenge. They usually represent the voices of elites, rulers, or religious institutions. Everyday people, informal knowledge, and oral traditions are rarely preserved. Even when texts survive, they reflect bias, symbolism, and the worldview of their authors. They tell us what someone wanted remembered, not everything that happened. Because of this, history is not discovered all at once. It is revised slowly, sometimes over generations. New sites, new tools, and new perspectives can reshape what seemed settled. This does not mean the timeline is unreliable. It means it is cautious. The story of civilization is built the same way a mosaic is built, from small, incomplete pieces assembled into the most reasonable image possible. As more pieces are found, the picture becomes clearer, but it is never finished. The history of civilization has never been static because new discoveries have a way of quietly reshaping what we thought we knew. What once appeared to be a clear starting point for organized society has repeatedly been pushed further back in time as new sites are uncovered and re-examined. For a long time, complex civilization was believed to begin with agriculture, permanent settlements, and later, large cities. This neat sequence suggested a gradual and predictable path forward, yet archaeological discoveries have complicated that picture. Sites revealing large-scale construction, symbolic art, and coordinated labor have appeared in periods once labeled as simple or transitional. These findings challenge the idea that social complexity followed a single, orderly path. Often, these discoveries do not overturn history overnight. Instead, they create quiet tension within existing models. A structure appears older than expected. A settlement shows signs of planning earlier than assumed. A tool reveals skill beyond what was thought possible for its time. At first, these findings seem like exceptions. Over time, as similar evidence accumulates, the broader timeline begins to shift. Advances in technology also play a major role. Improved dating techniques, satellite imaging, and soil analysis allow researchers to detect patterns that were previously invisible. Entire landscapes can be studied without excavation, revealing roads, fields, and settlements hidden beneath forests or sand. What looked like empty land may turn out to be deeply shaped by human hands. These revisions do not suggest confusion or failure. They demonstrate progress. A timeline that changes in response to evidence is not weak, it is honest. Each discovery adds depth, showing that early societies were often more creative, organized, and adaptive than once believed. Civilization, it seems, did not suddenly appear. It emerged unevenly, in many places, through many experiments, some remembered clearly, others only now coming back into view. Much of what we think we know about early civilization depends on what time has allowed to survive. This creates an unavoidable imbalance in the historical record. Stone structures, fired clay, and carved objects endure for thousands of years, while organic materials slowly disappear. As a result, history often highlights what was built to last rather than what was most commonly used. Daily life leaves faint traces. Homes made from wood, tools crafted from plant fibers, clothing, written records on fragile materials, and food systems rarely remain intact. Entire ways of living can vanish without leaving a clear mark in the ground. When these elements are missing, later interpretations can mistake absence for simplicity. This survival bias affects how complexity is measured. A society that invested in stone monuments appears advanced, while one that built efficiently with perishable materials may appear undeveloped. Yet both could have possessed deep knowledge, social organization, and long-term planning. The difference lies not in capability, but in durability. Trade networks, seasonal migration, and shared knowledge systems are especially difficult to detect. These systems rely on movement, memory, and relationships rather than permanent structures. Without written records or lasting materials, they are often invisible to archaeology, even though they may have supported large populations. Because of this, the past can seem quieter than it truly was. Silence in the record does not always mean inactivity. It often means that the evidence did thoughtful work, then faded away. Understanding this limitation helps explain why early history feels fragmented. What we see is not a full picture of civilization, but a filtered one shaped by time, environment, and chance. Many of the most important systems that supported early civilizations were built from materials that do not survive long periods of time. Wood, leather, plant fibers, textiles, and untreated paper degrade quickly when exposed to moisture, heat, and microorganisms. When these materials vanish, they take entire systems of knowledge with them. Transportation networks made from timber, agricultural tools crafted from organic materials, and homes designed for specific climates often disappear without trace. Even complex storage methods, water management solutions, and early writing systems may leave little behind if they were not carved in stone or fired in clay. What remains is only the most durable layer of a much richer reality. This loss affects how development is understood. When systems vanish, later observers may assume they never existed. A society that mastered seasonal farming, land management, or long-distance coordination could appear simple if the tools and records used to sustain those systems have decayed. Yet complexity does not always announce itself in permanent materials. Knowledge transmission also suffers from this loss. Oral traditions, training systems, and shared skills passed from generation to generation are among the most fragile elements of civilization. Without written records, these traditions can disappear within a few generations, especially after disruption or migration. As a result, history often focuses on what endured rather than what mattered most at the time. The absence of evidence becomes confused with evidence of absence. This does not mean early societies were hidden geniuses beyond recognition. It means their achievements were often practical, adaptive, and deeply tied to environments that did not preserve them. Civilization, in many cases, lived lightly on the land and time erased its footprints. Large stone monuments often dominate how civilization is recognized and ranked. Pyramids, temples, and massive walls create a sense of permanence and authority that survives across millennia. Because of this, societies that did not build in stone are frequently overlooked or misunderstood, despite showing clear signs of organization and sophistication. A civilization does not need towering architecture to function effectively. Communities built around seasonal movement, trade, or environmental balance often prioritized flexibility over permanence. Their success depended on coordination, shared knowledge, and social trust rather than monumental displays. These qualities rarely leave dramatic ruins behind. In many regions, environmental conditions made stone construction impractical or unnecessary. Abundant forests, wetlands, or floodplains encouraged building methods that were lighter and more adaptable. Structures could be rebuilt, adjusted, or relocated as conditions changed. While efficient for living populations, these choices left little for future observers to study. Social complexity can exist in governance, law, and cooperation. Systems for resolving conflict, distributing resources, and organizing labor may operate smoothly without centralized architecture. Such systems can manage large populations and long-distance connections while remaining nearly invisible. Archaeologically, because monuments endure, they shape expectations. When they are absent, assumptions fill the gap. A lack of stone is often mistaken for a lack of planning or intelligence. In reality, it may reflect different priorities and solutions. Recognizing complexity without monuments broadens the understanding of civilization. It allows history to include societies that were adaptive, mobile, and deeply skilled, even if their achievements were not carved into stone for time to preserve. The idea of advancement is often tied to modern expectations. Technology, machinery, and visible industrial progress tend to define how sophistication is measured. When these markers are absent, earlier societies are easily labeled as less developed. This perspective, however, reflects modern values more than historical reality. Advancement can take many forms. A society may lack metal tools or complex machines yet demonstrate extraordinary understanding of its environment. Knowledge of seasons, animal behavior, soil health, and water flow can sustain large populations over long periods. These skills require observation, experimentation, and collective memory refined across generations. Efficiency is another form of advancement. Some societies achieved stability with minimal resource waste, carefully balancing human needs with natural limits. Their success depended on restraint and adaptation rather than expansion. Such systems often leave subtle traces, making them difficult to recognize through material remains alone. Communication and organization also matter. Coordinating groups across distances, maintaining shared customs, and resolving disputes without constant conflict are signs of social maturity. These achievements rely on shared understanding rather than physical artifacts. When written records are absent, their impact can fade from view. By focusing too narrowly on technology, history risks overlooking these forms of intelligence. Progress is not a single path leading toward modern industry. It is a landscape of different solutions shaped by environment, culture, and necessity. When advancement is redefined, early civilizations appear less like unfinished versions of the present and more like complete systems in their own right. They were not waiting to become modern. They were solving the problems of their time with the tools, knowledge, and values available to them. Many ancient societies developed forms of knowledge that were highly specialized and deeply refined, even without modern tools or scientific language. This knowledge was often practical, observational, and passed down through careful teaching rather than written instruction. Over time, it produced results that were precise, reliable, and sustainable. Astronomy is one of the clearest examples. Long before telescopes, societies tracked the movements of stars, planets, and seasonal cycles with remarkable accuracy. These observations guided agriculture, navigation, and ceremonial life. Alignments in structures and landscapes show deliberate planning based on long-term sky watching rather than coincidence. Urban planning also reflects advanced thinking. Some early cities were designed with drainage systems, organized streets, and regulated water access. These features suggest foresight and collective agreement, not trial and error. Even without modern engineering tools, planners understood flow, balance, and maintenance. Environmental management reveals another layer of expertise. Terracing, controlled flooding, and soil renewal allowed communities to farm difficult landscapes for centuries. These systems required cooperation, timing, and deep environmental understanding. When maintained, they prevented erosion and resource exhaustion. Social and administrative knowledge played an equally important role. Systems of labor organization, record-keeping through symbols, and shared standards allowed societies to function smoothly at scale. Much of this knowledge existed in practice rather than text, making it vulnerable to loss. When these societies declined or changed, their expertise often disappeared with them. What remains are fragments. Yet even those fragments suggest that ancient knowledge was not simple, it was carefully developed, tested, and trusted over generations. Civilizations do not always fade slowly. Sometimes they are disrupted so suddenly that cultural memory fractures. Environmental change, resource stress, conflict, or widespread disease can interrupt systems that took centuries to build. When this happens, knowledge does not always transfer smoothly to the next generation. Writing traditions can be lost. Specialists may disappear. Infrastructure may fall into disuse. Without maintenance, even well-designed systems quickly fail. When populations move or shrink, shared understanding weakens, and practices that once felt permanent can vanish within a few lifetimes. Later societies often encounter the remains of these collapsed systems without context. Roads, terraces, or abandoned cities appear impressive but mysterious. Without records, their purpose must be guessed. Over time, stories replace explanations, and speculation fills the gaps left by silence. This process shapes historical interpretation. A society that experienced sudden decline may appear less capable than it truly was. Its final stage becomes mistaken for its entire story. What is remembered is collapse, not the long period of stability that came before. Cultural continuity depends on survival, not achievement. Even advanced systems mean little if no one remains to preserve or explain them. When memory breaks, history becomes fragmented. Understanding collapse as a loss of knowledge, not just population or buildings, helps explain why early civilizations can seem incomplete. They were not always primitive beginnings. In many cases, they were endings followed by generations who had to rebuild without access to what once existed. When societies encounter the remains of earlier cultures, interpretation is shaped by present knowledge and assumptions. Without shared language, records, or traditions, later generations often judge the past through their own values. This can lead to misunderstanding, oversimplification, or quiet dismissal of earlier achievements. A collapsed society may leave behind ruins that appear incomplete or inefficient by modern standards. Tools might seem crude, structures may look unfinished. Yet these judgments ignore context. What appears simple today may have been highly effective within its original environment and purpose. Successor cultures rarely inherit everything. They adapt what they can understand and discard what they cannot. Over time, this selective survival creates a distorted picture. Certain techniques are preserved, while others disappear entirely. The result is a fragmented legacy that no longer reflects the full capability of the original society. Historical narratives often favor continuity and progress. Gaps are uncomfortable, so they are smoothed over. Periods of loss may be described as decline or stagnation rather than transformation. In doing so, the complexity of earlier systems is reduced to a simplified storyline. This process is not intentional. It is a natural consequence of limited evidence and human perspective. Each generation reconstructs the past using the tools and ideas available to it. Recognizing this limitation encourages humility. It reminds us that understanding the past is not about judgment, but interpretation. What seems unimpressive from a distance may have been the result of careful knowledge, cooperation, and long-term thinking that no longer survives to explain itself. Questions about lost history often invite dramatic speculation. It is tempting to fill gaps with sweeping explanations or imagine entire worlds erased without trace. While curiosity drives discovery, history depends on evidence, not possibility alone. There is little support for the idea of a global, highly industrial civilization existing deep in the past and vanishing completely. Large-scale industry leaves unmistakable marks, widespread material remains, environmental impact, and consistent technological patterns. The absence of such evidence matters. However, rejecting extreme ideas does not mean dismissing uncertainty. The real gap lies not in hidden machines, but in underestimated human complexity. Early societies may have developed advanced systems of organization, observation, and environmental management that do not resemble modern technology and therefore escape easy recognition. Complexity does not require universality. Innovations often emerged independently, shaped by local conditions rather than global exchange. This results in uneven development across regions and time periods, making the past appear inconsistent or fragmented. Responsible interpretation balances imagination with restraint. It allows room for revision while remaining grounded in what can be tested and verified. This approach protects history from becoming rigid on one side or speculative on the other. By separating evidence from assumption, the timeline remains flexible without becoming unstable. It can expand, refine, and deepen as new discoveries appear without losing its foundation. The unknown is not an invitation to abandon reason, but a reminder of how much careful work remains to be done. When all these pieces are considered together, the timeline of civilization begins to look less like a straight line and more like a layered landscape. Progress did not move steadily forward in a single direction. It advanced, paused, adapted, and sometimes reversed. Different societies reached complexity in different ways, at different times, and for different reasons. What is often presented as a clean sequence of stages is, in reality, a collection of overlapping stories. Some communities experimented with organization and innovation early, while others followed later or chose entirely different paths. There was no single blueprint for civilization. This perspective suggests that human capability emerged earlier than once believed, but not uniformly. Knowledge appeared, disappeared, and reappeared across regions. Cultural memory was fragile, shaped by survival rather than achievement alone. As a result, the past feels incomplete not because nothing was there, but because much of it did not endure. An older timeline does not mean a more advanced one by modern standards. It means a longer record of problem-solving, adaptation, and creativity. Humans have been intelligent, observant, and resourceful for far longer than textbooks once suggested. Seen this way, history becomes more relatable. It is not a story of constant improvement, but of repeated attempts to understand the world and live within it. The timeline is not wrong, it is unfinished. And within that unfinished record lies the quiet reminder that human civilization has always been more complex, resilient, and thoughtful than it first appears. When we step back and look at the full picture, one idea becomes clear: the story of civilization is not wrong, but it is far from complete. What we call history is the most careful explanation we can build from what survived time, chance, and loss. It is shaped by evidence, limited by absence, and refined by each new discovery. Civilization did not move forward in a straight, predictable line. It emerged in waves, adapted to environments, rose through cooperation, and sometimes disappeared quietly, taking its knowledge with it. Early societies were not simply waiting for modernity to arrive. They were already solving complex problems in ways suited to their world. Understanding this makes history feel less distant and more human. It reminds us that intelligence, creativity, and organization are not recent achievements. They have been part of the human story for far longer than written records suggest. Perhaps the most important lesson is humility. What we know today is provisional. The timeline can expand, shift, and deepen as new evidence comes to light. And that openness is not a weakness, it is the strength of historical understanding. Thank you for spending this time exploring the past together. If this story made you pause, reflect, or see history a little differently, then it has done its job. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and thank you for listening.